This is Pastor Steve with the word study number 26, and the word today is moon. We know from Genesis 1:16 that God created the moon to rule the night. It's called the lesser light. Well, we know that the greater light is the sun. Well, we also know that the moon had a special significance for the ancient Israelites. Their festival calendar, which began each month with the rising of the new moon, was what was called as a lunar calendar. While the day of the appearing of the new moon was signaled by the blowing of a ram's horn. Well, this event was also observed with special sacrifices. But since the lunar year is about 11 days shorter than the solar year, a 13th month was added to the Hebrew calendar. Well, we find out that the Israelites started not just using it for their festivals, but they did as many of the nations around them did, and that was that they started worshiping the moon as well. Well, along with the sun and the planet Venus, the moon was worshipped as a cosmic god by many of the nations of the ancient world. Well, we find out that while the worship of the moon and any other natural phenomenon was strictly forbidden among the Hebrews, King Manasseh established the cults of all the host of heaven, presumably including the moon. Well, one of the things that I want to share with you is, yes, God created the moon for a good purpose. I just kind of a little story that kind of goes along with this, and that is several years ago I was planting a church in Indiana, and I was really busy, and I had this garden that behind my house that I was wanting to plant, and I was wanting to plant 3 long rows of potatoes. So one evening I hurried up and went by the hardware store, got the potato buds, and I put them in the ground, planted them, healed them up, and then I had called my dad later on that evening, and he said, "Well, what have you been doing today?" And I told him, "Well, I just planted 3 rows of potatoes." Well, it wasn't long, he called me back and said, "Son, you shouldn't have planted those potatoes today." And I said, well, why not? He said, "It's the wrong sign of the moon." And through the Farmer's Almanac, I just read that, and I said, "Dad, I don't really believe in that stuff, and so I'm not worried about it." Well, as the days and the weeks and maybe a couple months passed, my potato plants were the best beautiful bushes and plants I'd ever seen. They were, like 2.5 feet tall and really wide, just so healthy. And I thought, I'm going to have bushels of potatoes that I harvest from this. I don't even know what I'm going to do with all of them. Well, when the plants died down like they usually do at the end of the summer, I stuck a shovel in there, and I thought, well, here, I'm going to start harvesting these potatoes. Well, I pulled one plant up, and it's like had one potato on the end of the roots that was as big maybe as a dime. And I thought, well, it's the end of the row. It's probably just a bad plant. So as I began to go through, I realized I had no potatoes except little tiny ones, very few of those. Called my dad, and my dad said, "Son, I told you, you planted at the sign of the moon where all the growth above ground would be healthy, but not under the ground. And you want the growth to happen under the ground where your potatoes are formed." Well, again, I learned a valuable lesson. So again, the moon is given, the scripture says, for signs as a lesser light, but it is not to be worshiped. We all just thank God for it. So I hope today that you not only thank God for this beautiful moon that He's created, but for every good and perfect gift that comes from Him. God bless.